I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. Today, we're talking about something that strikes fear into the hearts of a lot of sewists, which is zippers. So we're going to cover why zippers feel so much harder than they actually are, the common mistakes that lead to most zipper frustration, and some mindset shifts and practical tips that'll help you approach your next zipper with real confidence. All right, let's get to our icebreaker, Haley. Tell me about a sewing technique that you put off trying for way too long and what finally got you to go for it. And then tell me how it turned out.
Okay, so when I was learning how to sew, I learned how to do buttonholes on an industrial sewing machine. I learned how to do all of my sewing on industrial sewing machines. And industrial buttonholers are the one that I worked on was very old, very finicky, and they're pretty finicky machines in general. I was traumatized by this machine. And so when I started sewing on a domestic sewing machine, I put off sewing buttons buttonholes for so long because I had...
You had trauma.
I had
buttonhole
some
trauma.
Low-key trauma around buttonholes. And my sewing machine has an automatic buttonholer. Literally, when I finally tried it, I was like, this is
doing it for me.
So silly because it's doing everything for me. I didn't know it could be this easy. I don't remember what was caused me to give it a try. I have to assume there was some pattern that I was willing to bite the bullet for. And it was definitely one of those moments where I was like, what was I so scared?
Yeah.
I feel like I have a lot of those throughout my sewing journey where I put off something. When I finally do it, I feel like, well, dang.
Yeah. That wasn't so bad.
It was not so bad.
I mean, that happens in so many things in life.
In life, yeah. I do that all the time, actually. I'm discovering some patterns here. What about you? What's something that you put off?
I think for me, sewing with knits, that was one thing that I didn't do for a long time because I didn't have a serger for quite a while. And I just didn't really know how to sew with knits and how to deal with stretch and all of that stuff. A lot of the things that I wanted to make back when I first started sewing were not knit garments anyway. I think I wear more knits now than I did back then. So, that's part of it too. But I was definitely intimidated by sewing with knits. And then when I got a serger, I was like, oh, this is really fun and fast and easy. And, once I learned, just like when I learned sewing, learning how to use the machine was the hardest part. The same thing with the serger. So I think that was a big one for me.
I used to teach a beginner knitwear class, and I found that was a pattern that a lot of people had. And then as soon as they popped the seal and made their first knit garment, then they were unstoppable, and then they could not stop making knit garments for a period.
They're so fast.
They become completely hooked on it.
Yeah. I sew a lot of knits now. It's just, they're so fast and I wear them all the time. So it's a good skill to have. All right, well, if you have an icebreaker for us for a future episode, you can leave a question for us in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, or you can leave it in a comment on Spotify, and we'll answer it in a future episode. We read all the comments and reviews, and we love hearing from you guys, so thanks for that. All right, so let's talk about zippers. So for the first couple of years that I was sewing garments, I have to confess, I actively avoided any pattern that had a zipper in it. I would be flipping through patterns. They had those giant pattern books at the time. Remember those? And I'd see either, an invisible zipper or a regular zipper or zipper fly in the description. And I would just move on, next, because I was just so intimidated. And I know I'm not the only one, because this comes up constantly in our community. People will say, I would love to make that skirt, but it has a zipper and I'm not really up to zippers yet. But I think the thing is that by avoiding zippers, I was really cutting off this huge part of what I could actually make. So I couldn't make, fitted dresses with a back closure, or structured skirts, or trousers with a fly front. And when I actually finally sat down and learned, just like you were talking about, Haley, I realized that the zipper itself wasn't really the hard part. And what was hard was really all the anxiety that I had built up around it. And I think this happens a lot in sewing. You know, we build a technique up in our heads until it seems way more difficult than it really is. And then we never try it, which just confirms the fear. So here's what I've learned. Getting past zipper fear is really a combination of two things: having the right approach and giving yourself permission to learn through doing. So we have a video on YouTube coming out this week with even more zipper tips. So if this is a topic that resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed to our channel at Seamwork Video on YouTube, and you'll get even more tips. But we're going to have a lot to share here today. But if you want the extra visuals, you'll see a lot there too. So were you ever afraid of zippers in particular?
Oh, yeah. I think that's a really common fear to have. I will say that I think that I conquered it fairly quickly, because when I was learning how to sew in school, in the first semester of fashion school, we had like a technical sewing class, and the instructor would demo techniques to us. And then before our next class in a few days, we would have to do multiple versions of it. Mm-hmm. So I remember very clearly the day that she demonstrated invisible zippers kind of stand out in my mind. She demoed the zipper, and she was just like very no nonsense, like kind of a woman. She just boom, boom, boom. Uh-huh. The demonstration was all of 60 seconds long. And then that night I had to do 3 invisible zippers, and I was like, I don't remember. Like, I couldn't write as fast as she was sewing this stuff. And I'm reading the instructions that come with the zipper, which are like crap. And I was so stressed out by it. I think that I had eventually asked one of my classmates who knew how to sew before we went to school, how to do it. And I just like trial by fire. Yeah. I had to do 3 of them that night. And it was that was the pattern. I just did it over and over again until I was desensitized. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying I haven't struggled with the zipper since. But that like repetition early on really helped to break that fear.
Yeah. I like that desensitization. It's like what you do with dogs.
Yeah, totally.
I was just desensitizing my dog to loud machinery noises yesterday. So I think that's a good metaphor.
Yeah. You said that you struggled with zippers early on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's really common. I feel like zippers and buttons and buttonholes are the 2 things I hear the most that people are scared and intimidated by when they're newer to sewing.
Those dang closures.
Yeah, I mean they are. If you haven't done them before, once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. But if you haven't done them before, it seems like a lot of steps and a lot of different gotchas. Yeah, I think
totally
is I think where a lot of people kind of get anxiety.
Yeah, and like the zipper feet and all of that, it just feels like I got to change my foot, and then I do this, and then I change my foot again. You know, it's just lots of things. Mm-hmm. Is there a specific type of zipper that still gives you pause?
I think the only one I would say is when it comes to fly fronts, because they're all done different, not all done differently, but there's a few different ways to do them. And depending on how your pattern is drafted and what you're sewing, you might want to do it slightly differently. So it's one of those where you just have to read the instructions and make sure that you're following along.
Yeah.
Versus most zippers, I can just bang them out and do them.
Yeah, totally. I was going to say the same thing, because there's like, depending on how it's drafted, you can't just be like, okay, cool, I'm going to sew the zipper real quick. I have to pause and I have to like go through the instructions and see which way they want me to do everything. Whereas when it comes to the point in a skirt to install the invisible zipper, I just make sure that I'm installing it at the correct placement.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. I think the other thing that, I wouldn't say this gives me pause, but one thing I try to watch out for, because it's definitely thrown me a few times, is matching up seams when you're putting in a zipper, making sure, like, for example, the waist seam still aligns, because it's very easy to get off by a few millimeters, and then you look at it and you're like, ugh, I wish I'd been a little bit more careful. But we're going to share some tips and tricks that will hopefully help with that. I've learned over the years.
Yeah. Well, let's get into some of those. Okay. So I'll kick us off with like a little zipper psychology. So we're going to name the fear and understand why zippers feel intimidating. I think that it's always great to just start with naming what's going on, because I think understanding why zippers feel scary actually takes away some of like the power of that fear. Think about what makes sewing a zipper different than sewing a regular seam. When you sew a side seam, for instance, it's pretty forgiving. If you're like a little bit off, you probably like will not even notice it. But with a zipper, it's highly functional, and a lot of times it can be a little bit more visible. If it's wavy or if it's like puckered, it doesn't line up. You'll see it every time you zip yourself up. And that visibility, I think, raises the stakes in our minds a little bit. There's also the sequencing. A zipper installation has a lot more precise steps that build upon each other. And it's so what you'll find is if step 2 is a little bit off, then by step 5, you really start to see the consequences of that a little bit more. And so it has kind of a domino effect where something like a hem, it doesn't necessarily have that same effect. And then there's the issue of the time investment. By the time you've installed a zipper, you've usually already invested hours into the project. You've cut your fabric, you've sewn the seams, maybe even done like some fitting. So the idea of messing it up at this point can feel like you've ruined all of your work. So if zippers make you feel nervous, I want you to know that that's completely reasonable. And I don't think that you're being silly. I think these are all really real reasons to feel like it's hard. But the good news is that every single one of these things that I just listed, you might be thinking like, Haley, what, you just gave me a list of reasons not to sew a zipper. The thing is, all of these reasons, there are easy solutions, tools, techniques that you can use to like mitigate those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's totally true. And I feel like, especially that part about the domino effect of all the steps is one of the things that is kind of what we talked about earlier. Creates that anxiety in your mind. So let's talk about kind of making a mindset shift from there, and not seeing it as one big scary task, but seeing it as just a series of small decisions. And this is really the one that changed everything for me, not just for zippers, but for a lot of things in sewing. So you want to stop thinking of installing a zipper as this one single monolithic thing that you either can or can't do, because it's not really one skill. It's a chain of small, very manageable steps. You mark, you baste, you press, you stitch, you press again. Each of those individual steps, you can do every single one of them. I think of it like cooking a holiday meal. So if someone says, make a full Thanksgiving dinner, that feels super overwhelming. But if someone says, first chop the onions, okay, I can chop onions, I can do that. And it's the same thing with zippers. You don't have to hold the entire process in your head all at one time. You just have to focus on the step that you're on right now. And, it connects to something we talk a lot about, which is that sewing is really just a process of making creative decisions, one after another. And a zipper is exactly that. It's a series of decisions, and each one is totally within your ability. And when you think of it that way, the whole thing shrinks down to a much more manageable size. So I think that's something that's helped me in my sewing.
Yeah, and I think that when I first started sewing, it was easy to think of things in terms of like the larger skill set. And I think that once you overcome enough of those sewing challenges, over time, you really begin to realize that it's just a series of steps, probably steps similar to ones you've already done in the past, maybe just sequenced slightly differently.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just breaking it down, I mean, it's true for so many things in life, but just breaking it down into the smallest components has a way of taking all of the fear out of it.
Yeah, totally. But let's get into some like more nitty-gritty tips here. I want to talk about a really common mistake that I see, and that is skipping basting. So for anyone who isn't familiar, basting just means that you're sewing a temporary long stitch to hold like everything in place before you do your final stitching on your machine. It's a stitch that you'll then remove later. And a lot of people skip this because they feel like it's extra work. I think it can be really easy to get in the mindset of like, I just want to get this over with and I don't want to sew this dang seam twice. But the thing is that basting is probably the single biggest thing that you can do to make zippers easier and less stressful. It holds everything exactly where you want it, so you can check the alignment and make sure the zipper is positioned correctly. And it helps you to catch any issues before you commit to your final stitch. You can kind of think of it like a dress rehearsal. It gives you the chance to make sure everything is going to look correct and you can make adjustments while it's still easy to do so. So you can make sure that like any intersecting seams or prints align correctly. You can make sure that if you're sewing an invisible zipper, your zipper tape does not twist. It helps you to troubleshoot all of these kinds of things up front. And a basting stitch takes all of 5 seconds to remove, where, a stitch on your sewing machine maybe takes a little bit longer and is a little bit a more emotional investment in that seam as well. I find that it takes maybe 5 extra minutes, and honestly, it can save you like hours, maybe not quite hours, but at least an hour of ripping out and redoing, and sometimes having to repeat that process all over again.
Yeah.
So I definitely highly recommend this, and if you're anti-basting, we'll go over some alternatives in a minute here. Sarah, do you always baste your zippers?
So I will say yes and no. I will often use some of the alternatives that we're going to be talking about in a minute. And the reason is I do think basting is really important. But I think there are some creative ways to do it that make it not just faster and more efficient, but also give you a better result.
Yeah, I find that I tend to break out the hand basting when I'm working on a very particular type of fabric, or if I have some like intersecting seams, or I'm worried about if I'm matching like a stripe or a plaid, and I really feel like I want to be precise within like a 1/16 of an inch, I will do hand basting. Otherwise, we'll get into some of the alternatives because I feel like there's some workarounds here.
Yeah, that's the thing about hand sewing generally, is it gives you a ton of control. So if you really need to have a lot of control over what you're doing, that's when you want to pull out the hand stitching. Not literally pull out the hand stitching.
Yeah.
You'll do that later.
Put in the hand stitching and then pull out.
All right, let's talk about another common mistake, which is not using the right tools. And I think this is a really common source of zipper frustration, just not having the right tools on hand. And I know that might sound really obvious, but when I think back to my earliest zipper attempts, I was trying to make it work with a regular presser foot because I didn't really understand that there were specific presser feet for doing specific things. And it just doesn't work very well. So at a minimum, you need a zipper foot on your machine. A regular presser foot is going to be too wide. The foot of it is going to be too wide, and it can't get close enough to the zipper teeth. So your stitching ends up too far from the teeth, and the whole thing will just end up looking uneven or loose. Or if you're trying to stitch over the zipper, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be really wavy, and it's just going to be much harder than it needs to be. So a zipper foot lets you stitch right up alongside the teeth, which is what gives you that really clean, precise line. And then beyond the zipper foot, the tool I really love for zippers, and this is going back to the basting conversation we were just having, is Wonder Tape. It's that narrow adhesive tape that washes away later. Sometimes it's called wash away basting tape sometimes. And I use it to hold the zipper in place instead of either pinning or hand basting because it's faster than hand basting. And when it comes to pinning, pins can shift and then they create little bumps of bulk right where you need things to be completely smooth. And that can also make it hard to align things, like align seams or align patterns the way you want. So Wonder Tape or a similar product. Wonder Tape is the Dritz brand, but there are other versions of it. Wawak sells one. That's the one I usually use, which is a little bit less expensive, and I think it works super well. And then there's marking. So take the time to mark your zipper placement. Take the time to mark your zipper placement, your stop points, and your seam allowances accurately. So I use usually chalk or a water-soluble pen of some kind. And when those marks are really clear, everything just goes a lot more smoothly. I really believe that almost every time something goes wrong in sewing, it comes down to one of two things. And we say this all the time. It's either the right tool or the right technique. And with zippers, getting your tools sorted takes you so far. Do you use all of these tools, Haley?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Wonder Tape.
Me too.
In fact, when I moved several years ago, I was packing up my sewing room and I found like a roll of it in like every single basket. And I ended up with like a big zipper, like a Ziploc bag filled with Wonder Tape.
You got to keep it everywhere.
I'm stocked for life because I just like kept acquiring it. I would say that my other favorite, I think it's like underrated, depending on who you speak to, zipper tool is an iron.
Mm-hmm.
Do not underestimate the power of pressing when you are installing zippers of all varieties, whether that is a lapped zipper, a centered zipper, an invisible zipper where you want to press the zipper tape to make sure that those zipper coils are sitting up straight so that you can sew really close to them. Zipper fly, make friends with your iron, regardless of what you're sewing, but especially with zippers.
Yeah. I want to mention one other thing, going back to Wonder Tape, which is I mentioned earlier that not only can it be more efficient, but it can give you a better result. And I would just want to expand on that for a second. The reason that it can give you a better result is because Wonder Tape also provides stability. So it is, like I said, an adhesive tape that you apply to your fabric and then you put whatever else you want to stick to it. So in this case, a zipper. And it keeps the fabric from stretching out while you're sewing. So if you are using, for example, a very lightweight fabric, it'll provide that extra stability and make sure that your stitches look very, very clean, even though the fabric is lighter than the zipper. So it's really handy for that reason as well.
Well, that leads us beautifully into the next common mistake, which is not stabilizing your fabric. I feel like this one is maybe a little bit less obvious, but I find that it can make a really huge difference to your result. So if you've ever installed a zipper and the fabric around it ends up kind of like wavy or rippled or stretched out, it's usually because the fabric wasn't stabilized in that area. So what I mean by stabilizing is giving the zipper area a little bit of extra structure so that the fabric doesn't stretch or distort while you're sewing through it. I find that the easiest way to do this is with a strip of lightweight fusible interfacing. I really like lightweight knit interfacing for this because it has just enough give that it doesn't make the fabric act unnaturally. You just apply this right along your seam line where the zipper is going to go before you serge it or apply your seam finish. And then, or you could also stay stitch if you don't want quite the same structure as an interfacing might offer. You would just do a little line of stitches right on the inside of your seam allowance. So if you're installing your zipper at 5/8, you do your stay stitching at 1/2 inch. And that's going to keep your fabric from stretching. And like Sarai said, the like a wash away tape is going to do a very similar thing that this stay stitching is going to do. I find that this matters most with lighter weight fabrics, specifically things that might have a little more drape to them, like a challis or even a lighter weight cotton lawn. These fabrics really love to stretch, especially when you're handling them a lot during a zipper installation. But honestly, I even stabilize my medium weight fabrics now because I just find that it makes the whole process a lot more predictable, and I find that it gives you a little cleaner finish. And once you start doing it, you'll like seriously wonder why you ever skipped it. Do you usually stabilize?
I usually do. I often sew with lightweight fabrics, especially things that have zippers. They're often in lightweight fabrics for me personally. And I find that just having a little strip of interfacing where the zipper is going makes it really prevents that kind of wavy look that you sometimes get where it feels like the fabric is kind of hanging from the zipper.
Yeah.
If you guys have experienced that, it really helps with that. Just provides a little bit more structure and support. So I cut strips of knit interfacing, which is very lightweight. And I just keep that in my little sewing chest so that anytime I need to do it, I have it right there ready to go.
Yeah, totally. You can also use knit stay tape, which is basically just knit interfacing that's been pre-cut into, I think it's like a 1/2 inch width. And you can buy that at most sewing shops.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to talk about what happens when things actually go wrong with your zipper. So we'll come back to mindset for a minute, because I think this next tip is really important for anyone who does get discouraged by zippers. One of the things that makes zippers feel so high stakes is this belief that if you have to rip it out, then you've just totally failed. But here's something that I want to share with you guys. I still rip out zippers sometimes, after years and years of sewing. I'll install a zipper, I'll look at it, and I'll decide that it needs to come out and just be redone. And it's fine. It's not failure, it's just iteration. And that's just part of how sewing works. Sometimes that happens. And I actually think of my seam ripper as one of the most important creative tools. Every time I rip something out and I redo it, I'm choosing to make it better. I'm learning that something about what really works for me and what doesn't. And I don't think that's a step backwards. That's a step forward. And the willingness to rip out and try again is just really what separates a zipper you feel really proud of from one that you just kind of tolerate. So that's my challenge to you. The next time you sit down to install a zipper, go in knowing that you might rip it out once. Just plan on it and give yourself that permission ahead of time, because it takes so much pressure off. And you'll probably be more relaxed, which means you'll actually sew better. So I think that goes for zippers, but also for anything in sewing.
Totally. I will say that I have a 2 seam ripper rule. If I've ripped out the same thing twice, it's time for a break.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good rule. That's a good rule, because sometimes it's not about just making it perfect. It's like you just need to eat something or go get some coffee or step away.
Yeah, you need a little reset. I find that it's oftentimes like a little bit of like an emotional mental block when I've made that same mistake twice. So steal that from me.
Yeah, I love that.
All right, we have one more tip before we wrap things up, and that is to practice before the pressure is on. And I think that this tip really ties together everything that we've been talking about. If you're nervous about zippers, or honestly, if you're like learning any new technique, don't make your first attempt on a project that you've invested a ton of time in, maybe a beautiful, potentially expensive fabric. And instead, I would grab some scrap fabric and a cheap zipper and just practice it. You can cut 2 rectangles of fabric and sew them together with a zipper in between and see how it turns out. You don't need a pattern. You're just kind of practicing the mechanics of it all. Do it 2 or even 3 times like I was forced to do. And you can use this as an opportunity to try some different things. See what happens if you skip the basting, or if you use Wonder Tape versus pins, and kind of experiment with what works best for you. Because Sarai and I, we have our preferences, but as you begin to experiment on your own, you're going to develop your own. And that's great. There's more than one way to do everything. And I think that's what is really powerful about removing the stakes, is if it turns out terrible, who cares? It's like it's scraps. You haven't really ruined anything. You can even reuse that zipper.
Yeah.
Again, just rip it out. Use a long stitch length when you're installing it. And a low pressure environment is actually, I find, where some of the fastest learning can happen, because you're not like all tense and worried. You're just you're giving yourself permission to explore. And I think this is why our skills workshops are set up the way that they are. Actually, no, this is why they are. Because you're learning a skill in a supportive environment where you can ask questions and get feedback and learn and practice without all of the pressure.
Yeah. It's really fun to just practice a skill like that and feel like, okay, I've got this one under my belt, and now I can apply it to something.
Yeah, I mean, I do this almost with every single project that I sew. I was just cutting out something the other night, and Charlie came into my office while I was cutting, and I had a bunch of scraps, and she was asking if she could have them. And I was like, girl, don't take those yet. I need to cut pieces to practice on. She's like, practice? I was like, yeah, practice. I have to have like my multiple 12 by 12 little pieces so I can make sure that my tension is right on my serger.
Yep.
And I can test the buttonhole to make sure that it's correct and all of those types of things. All of my years of personal and professional experience do not exempt me from the need to practice things.
Yeah, absolutely. I always keep scrap fabric right to the right of my sewing machine.
Yeah.
Because every time you have, let's say you have a bobbin issue and you have to rewind the bobbin or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you put it back in, you don't want to go right into your garment and just hope that it's not going to shred or something like that. You want to have a way to practice and make sure things are the way you want them before you dive in.
Yeah, totally. And I wanted to make a scrunchie. So
yeah,
she got... I finally let her have the rest of my scraps. She got her first Barbie, so she's like in Barbie clothes making territory.
I used to love my grandmother's scrap basket when I was little. It was so fun to play with all those little scraps.
So fun. I didn't grow up in a sewing household, so I'm like, this is so fun that she gets to do this, but don't take my scraps before I give you permission, girl.
All right, well, let's recap all of these wonderful tips and steps because I think they apply to zippers and they apply to a lot of other things in sewing. So we started by naming why zippers feel so intimidating, the visibility, the precise sequencing, that feeling of high stakes when you've already invested so much in a project. And then we talked about two big mindset shifts. First, that a zipper isn't one scary task. It's a series of small decisions that you make one at a time. And second, that ripping out and redoing is part of the process, not a sign of failure. And then we covered the three most common mistakes: skipping the basting, not using the right tools like a zipper foot or Wonder Tape, and not stabilizing your fabric beforehand. And then we wrapped up with practicing in a low-stakes way before you tackle the real thing. And my big takeaway from today's episode, I think, is kind of goes back to what you were saying just now, Haley, about practice. I was just thinking about this week that as I get older, I feel like I say that a lot as I get older, but it's true. You're just constantly discovering things, I think. And one of the things that I have been thinking about is just that everything is practice and that there's so many things when you're younger that you feel like, oh, I wish I knew how to do this, or I'm not good at this, or, just stories you tell yourself about skills or abilities or characteristics that you wish you had. And it all comes down to really consistent and diligent practice. Even things, when I was younger, I would say I was not a patient person. I still, don't feel like I'm as patient as other people, but I've practiced being patient, and sewing is one of the ways that I do that. And that has cultivated patience in me. And, maybe I don't have that naturally, but I feel like I'm quite a bit more patient than I was when I was younger. So I feel like just coming back to this idea that if you feel like something is intimidating or it's not in your wheelhouse or it feels really hard for you, that's totally okay. And all you need is a little bit of, or maybe a lot of practice.
And if you need a lot, that's okay too.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sometimes I need a lot of practice.
Yeah, I feel like, some of my tendencies, they're going to be with me for the rest of my life, but I can practice. Countering them with things like patience or diligence or whatever helps me.
Yeah, practice is like making friends with those tendencies, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think kind of building on that, I think that with sewing, particularly, I think all sewing, garment sewing, quilting, whatever kind of sewing you're into, it can be a very results, product oriented pursuit. We're making things. The goal is to make the thing a lot of times. But I find the older I get, the more I sew, the more I can divorce the product from the process, the happier
I
am.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like I'm racing to a finish line. I feel like I'm in the moment and I'm enjoying doing what I'm doing. So when you're, and I would say take that when you're learning a new skill or practicing a new skill, the result is fun. It's exciting, but the skill is a greater prize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true for just so many things in life. Well, we started talking about zippers. We ended on a much deeper topic, which I love.
Typical.
Happens for us. So we've been talking about how the best way to conquer zipper fear is to actually do it, having the right approach and the right support around you. And if you want to put what we talked about today in action, we have 2 things that can help. First, you can download our free Learn to Sew kit, and that includes our skills checklist, which is a really useful tool for tracking your progress as you build your sewing skills, including things like zipper techniques. So you can see exactly where you are and where you want to go. It's completely free, and we'll put the link for that into the show notes. And if you're ready to really dive in, we're running a skills workshop in June that's all about the zipper fly. So this is a hands-on workshop where you'll actually sew a zipper fly step by step with guidance, support, and a community of sewists learning right alongside you. And that's available for all Seamwork members. And we do these classes every month. So it's a really fun way to build your skills over time. So if you want to participate, just visit seamwork.com and click on how it works to learn how to join us. All right, so that's it for us this week. If you liked this episode, leave us a review. We love to hear from you guys. And if you have an icebreaker question, you can definitely leave it in a review or a comment, and we'll take a look and add it to a future episode. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You can follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to become part of the Seamwork community, head over to seamwork.com to learn how to join us. And that's it for us this week. I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.